This is TLV1.
This season of the Tel Aviv Review is made possible by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel.
The Tel Aviv Review with Ghil'ad Zuckermann.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate. I'm your host, Ghil'ad Zuckermann, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of ideas, of all types and vocations, who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guests today are working on an interdisciplinary project that seeks to explore the relationship between language, education and politics in Israel. Ghil'ad Zuckermann is a professor of linguistics at the University of Adelaide in Australia, is the author of numerous books and publications, but perhaps most famously is the author of the bestseller Israeli, A Beautiful Language, in which he claimed that Hebrew isn't a native language of modern Israelis. The language is indeed Israeli. Hello, Ghil'ad, and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hi, Ghil'ad. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you're the first Ghil'ad that I've had. I'm 10 times more excited than usual. And also in the studio is Dr. Gitit Holzmann. She's a lecturer in Jewish philosophy at the Levinsky Teachers College in Tel Aviv. Hello, Gitit, and welcome.
Hello, Ghil'ad.
So, Ghil'ad, let's start with you. What are the theoretical underpinnings of your assumptions regarding the link between language and politics?
That's a wonderful question, Ghil'ad. Let us start with the three components that every national movement would like to have. That is land, heritage, and indeed language. Zionism, as I see it, is a Jewish channeling of European nationalism that had these three components being searched. So Zionism actually asks itself, okay, heritage we have. We say every year, next year in Jerusalem. We have the land. Well, we need to go back to Zion. That's the land of Israel. And we need to have a national language, the language of the future political entity known as the State of Israel. If you look at what Zionists did when they reclaimed the Hebrew language, they took words that were loaded with religiosity, like Mishkan, for example. You know, Mishkan was the place where you worked God. Mm-hmm. And they turned it into a place where you work the state, the politics, the policy of the state. So, in fact, what a national movement does is replacing words that are religious with words that are state. God is dead. The new God is the state.
Mm-hmm. But in many ways, the case of Israel is an exception, and it isn't at the same time, because this is, as you say, something that every national movement seeks to achieve. But in the case of Zionism, they had really to scrape the bottom of the barrel and come up with a language that was predominantly used for religious purposes and also dormant. So it needed to be practically reinvented.
Absolutely. And you're right that the difference between Zionism and other national movements is not necessarily qualitative, but rather quantitative. But I would argue that the difference between quantitative and qualitative is quantitative. Let me explain. Zionism did what other national movements do in a very long time within 30 years. This is on the one hand. And on the other hand, Zionism...
We're talking about the early 20th century here?
Early, and the end of the 19th century, the fin de siècle. Yeah. And on the other hand, what Zionism did was seeking ancientness of 2,000 years. Usually, let's say the Ukraine, they argue, oh yeah, we are very ancient, etc. Yeah, we are before the Russians. But Zionism tried to negate the history within the diaspora, a history of 2,000 years. So as if we never spoke Yiddish, we never spoke Judeo-Spanish, etc. And trying to reinvent itself as the biblical Jew with the ha and the ah, etc. So Zionism, because of the quantity, which was amazing, also the amount of neologisms, new words that were created, concocted, was so much larger within 30, 50 years than other national movements in which there was no reclamation in the sense that of 2,000 years of death, as in the language is not a native tongue, 1,750 years to be specific. So the Zionism is different qualitatively because of the quantitative difference between qualitative and quantitative.
Right.
It's kind of a funny...
Yeah. Gitit, what is your take on this from perspective of a Jewish philosopher? This rather, I'd say, linguistic imposition, if we can put it under, under one title. How did it affect thought? And then we come back to the link between the tool and the more abstract entity.
Well, actually, Ghil'ad is a linguist, is professor of linguistics, and I'm looking at Jewish philosophy. And when I was reading and becoming aware of his theories, I realized that, in fact, you can put it in a larger context, that is the development of Jewish philosophy as a whole. And in fact, when Zionist movement started and when they came to Israel, they wanted to, as if to make a leap over 1,000 years of diaspora and to get connected to the biblical heritage. But in fact, it's impossible because Jewish religion, as it is today, is not linked to biblical heritage, but rather is linked and built over many layers of Jewish thought and philosophy and customs that were developing in diaspora in previous years.
But the Zionist endeavor was, in a way, to undo everything that came after the Bible and go back to the origins, as it were. You're saying that it was...
But first of all, it is impossible. And second of all, the other point I want to make is that Zionist movement presents itself as a secular movement. But in my opinion, and not only in my opinion, it is not less religious than other religious movement or Jewish religion, but it kind of makes a shift in the way it presents itself. It kind of rebels against all religious tradition, but it actually starts a kind of new religion, which has its own commandments, its own beliefs. Rather than believing in one God, it believes in one country or in one language. And that is the way I'm connecting to
So just like Ghil'ad is saying that there's no Hebrew language today, there's Israeli language, you're saying that there's no Jewish religion, there's an Israeli religion.
Exactly. And to continue what Ghil'ad just said, I say that there is a myth of reviving the so-called dead biblical language, as if revive it and we speak it today. But the reality is that it's not what we speak today in Israel is in fact a different language. And in fact, when we look, and this was of course the theory, the breakthrough of the groundbreaking theory of Ghil'ad. But when I started to be interested in it and reading at what other scholars write, in fact, everyone say it's a different language, it's a different grammar, it's a different vocabulary, but they are declining of changing the name because, and in my opinion, in my view, as a philosopher or as expert of Jewish philosophy, because it is a result of a major influence of the monotheistic religion, of monotheistic myth. Okay, we are not religious, we don't believe in God, but we don't believe in one God. This is ancient. We left it in the diaspora, but we do believe in one language. But because they're academics, because they are secular, they don't say we believe in one language. They say this is the academic theory. But in my opinion, it's a religious belief in an academic disguise.
But they're not mutually exclusive, are they? I mean, what you're describing now, yet... Jewish religion, in its classical sense, is very present within the Israeli debate, even the political one, within the predominantly secular society.
It is, but my view is that it is very dangerous when you are religious and when you speak from a religious stance and you're not aware of it. If you are a religious person, you say, okay, this is my belief, this is my ideal, this is what I'm willing to live for and die for and live a, very difficult life in this specific part of the world, it's okay. But if you say, no, I'm academic, I'm objective, I'm a scientist, but from scientific point of view, this is one language that was spoken here thousands of years ago and we speak it today, this is wrong and this is very misleading.
Yes. Okay, Ghil'ad, I would like to go now to the area of education and pedagogy pedagogy when it comes to that gap between the Israeli language and the Hebrew language? Because here in Israel, and that also feeds into your current research, perhaps the purest access that we have to Hebrew is, of course, when we read the Bible, which is something that we have to do at school throughout our education. And if I understand your contention, Bible in Israel should be taught as if it was written in a foreign language rather than the native language of these students. So before we get to that example in particular, can you please tell us about the cognitive differences between a native language and a foreign language, and how it should be addressed when it comes to teaching and education?
Absolutely. There are many researchers these days from all over the world showing that when you speak a native tongue, so this is a tongue that you speak perfectly with no accent, other people think that you are a native speaker. So, for example, English obviously is not my native speaker. I speak 11 languages, but only 1.5, I would argue, are native languages, which are Israeli and Italian, semi-native.
What about Hebrew?
I don't speak Hebrew as a native language, of course, but I know it, sometimes even better than some professors of Bible who believe they understand the Bible, but they totally misunderstand the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of worrying to have a professor of biblical Hebrew talking about a word without knowing what it means literally. Mm-hmm. So coming back to the differences between foreign language and native language, look, I mean, you can be a native speaker of 5 languages. There is no problem whatsoever. But what is lit in your brain when you speak a foreign language is different, according to neurocognitive researchers, than what is lit in your brain when you speak your mother tongue. So it has to do with something that is beyond our consciousness. And this is sometimes you can see when somebody gets a stroke, for example. They totally forget the languages that they used to speak. For example, he came to Israel, this guy at the age of 18 from Russia, but he only spoke Israeli. But then, unfortunately, he gets a stroke and then he turns to Russian, he resorts to Russian, and there is no trace of Israeli. And, things like that, which prove that there is something which is more kind of at the center of the brain as opposed to the peripheral languages, like, say, my own ancient Greek would be very peripheral. So if, God forbid, I get a stroke, I mean, obviously Greek will be gone.
And is this why you make the distinction between Israeli and Hebrew? Because different parts of the brain are lit when we Israelis speak Israeli and speak or read Hebrew?
Absolutely. Or more specifically, in 1000 AD or 1000 CE, there was nobody who spoke Hebrew as a native tongue. Passé researchers by Haramati or Zev Chomsky, who might have implied that there were always somewhere in the world people who spoke Hebrew. They were not native speakers. So after Bar Kokhba, say 135 AD, until 1886, which is the year when Itamar, Ben Yehuda's son, starts speaking, no one speaks Hebrew as a mother tongue. Mm-hmm. So, of course, the evolution of a mother tongue when spoken is totally different from the evolution of a dead or sleeping beauty language. The evolution of a mother tongue is organic. So shift happens. English today is very different from the English of Chaucer, but still it's an organic evolution. In 1886, when Itamar opens his mouth and symbolically he's the first native speaker of Israeli, his language ab initio is not an organic evolution of Hebrew, but rather a hybridic revolution. It's a revolution, it's not an evolution. And it's a hybrid, and it's beautiful. I love hybrids. There is nothing wrong with hybrids. I know that many people do not they dislike the term of hybrid, it's like a jargon or a bastard. No, I think that hybridity is beautiful. But then if you understand that Israeli is a hybrid language, then the word intuitia, for example, intuition, is not a foreign word. It's part of Israeli. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's foreign for Hebrew, but not for Israeli. Now, an Israeli totally misunderstands the Bible without understanding that he or she misunderstands the Bible. Mm-hmm. And this is the worst situation. You see, it's like what Gitit said about religion. When you're religious and you know that you're religious, there is no problem whatsoever. I mean, you might be aware of Wittgenstein, who said that religious talk is neither false nor true. It's just meaningless from the point of view of logic. Mm-hmm. When you're religious, but you're not aware of your religiosity. Say, Yossi Sarid, my friend, who unfortunately passed away recently, he was religious when it comes to language. You know? He had a mitzvot instead of, doing the tefillin, the phylacteries, he did the mitzvot of don't say 10 shekel, say 10 shekelim.
And he also mastered Hebrew in a way that very few Israelis ladies do.
Right.
Hebrew, the classical Hebrew.
Right, but if you ask Yossi to read the Bible, of course, he would read it better than some of the examiners of the Chidon Tanakh, the Tanakh quiz, but they totally misunderstand the Bible. For Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz et ha'tohu v'vohu v'choshech b'nei tehom. Forgive my Israeli accent of the Hebrew, because no one sounded like that. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. People totally misunderstand that. They think that, firstly, they don't ask why Bereshit and not Bareshit, because Bereshit means at the beginning of what? Then Shamayim v'haaretz does not mean heaven and earth like people understand. It means world. It's a merismus, which means that you use the extremes, heaven or sky and earth, to refer to the whole, like zaken vataf, which means old people and young and children, but actually it means also people our age. And then you have v'haaretz et ha'tohu v'vohu. Even examiners within the Tanakh quiz, they think tohu v'vohu means balagan, which means chaos, mess, but actually it means the opposite. It means nothingness. So in fact, you cannot have balagan or chaos when you have nothingness. You need something to play with in order to have. So Israelis totally misunderstand tohu v'vohu. Choshech b'nei tehom. People think tehom is abyss. No, it's water, a lot of water. So I can give you thousands of examples, and there are only 8,000 words in the Bible where Israelis totally misunderstand it without realizing. Now, when you have Hartom Kasuto, you look up when you have the gloss. Like I don't understand that. But if you have a word like ekdach or whatever, you think, I know the word, no problem. Why should I look down the glosses? This is why we need a translation of the Bible, and we have Tanakh Ram. This is the translation.
Yeah, okay. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. And before we get to Tanakh Ram, which is somewhat, addressing the problems that you raise, tell us, Gitit, briefly, in addition to what Ghil'ad said, what are really the pitfalls that Bible education in this country is encountering, and, in very pragmatic tools, how it can be addressed when a Bible teacher walks into the class and needs to teach those kids the Bible?
I want to continue what Ghil'ad just said, and I also want to go much back further in history to Socrates. And Socrates was told...
Who didn't speak Hebrew.
No, but he was told he was the most clever or the most smart or the most educated person in Greece. And the reason he was told that was that he knew that he didn't know anything. So the first, and this is like the first layer of all Western philosophy and culture. So I think the first thing he told us, and actually Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher of the Middle Ages, also said the most important thing is to know, what you don't know, and what is the validity of everything you know, whether it is a belief, whether it is a scientific fact, whether it is something you saw or you felt or you heard, etc. So I think the major pitfall in teaching Bible in Israel is that both students and teachers and Ministry of Education in all levels, they think that the students know the language in which they study. And this is false. It's a false belief. It's ideological stance and not a true fact.
Do you think that Hebrew should be taught like other foreign languages are taught in schools?
It's not what I think. It's what teachers and students and everyone who actually teaches Bible. I also was in the past, I taught Bible in high schools, and I'm very interested in the topic. And what I found is that the more a person is really involved, whether as a student, as a teacher, or as a parent, a miserable parent like myself who has to help their children at school with Bible classes and the homework, the more they are really involved in it, the more they are helpless, they are frustrated, and they really don't know what to do.
Because they think they're supposed to know, but in fact they don't.
And they don't, and they are not given the tools. They are not given the means in which to study. And I heard a Bible teacher saying, when I come to class to teach Bible, it's as if I'm coming to class to teach English and I'm teaching Shakespeare without teaching the ABC, without teaching basic vocabulary. She says, when I'm teaching English, I know it's a foreign language. The student knows it's a foreign language. Everyone knows it's a foreign language. We have to study, first of all, the language, or we have to use dictionary, we have to use some tools. But when we go into class and teach Bible, it's a big lie. And my observation is that the more people I hire in the hierarchy, like Minister of Education, I'm not referring to any specific person right now, or there are politicians or in a government, then they talk about about the Bible and how important it is, and so forth. But the more they are ground to earth and the more they deal with it day by day, they see it is actually impossible. And because the Ministry of Education forbid to use the Tanakh Ram and other tools, teachers have to be very creative, and they are. We have excellent teachers, and they invent all kinds of ways to teach the Bible without saying it's a foreign language and without using things
so tell us very briefly, because we are running out of time, unfortunately, about Tanakh Ram, this educational tool that came in and basically translated the Bible into Israeli.
I think that the main advantage of Tanakh Ram is that it does have the original. So it's not just getting the Bible, instead of reading Chaucer.
It's not vulgarization.
Yeah, right. It has the original, and it has it's like a bilingual poetry book. I love bilingual poetry books, or even trilingual poetry books. I have like Yehuda Amichai in Israeli and in English. But you have both on the same page. And then, of course, the advantage is that unlike Hatum Kasuto, where you will not look down when you see a word that you believe you know from Israel.
To the footnotes.
Right, exactly. So you say, why should I look tzlil? Tzlil, I know it's sound, but of course it does not mean sound in the Bible. So the advantage is that you have, of course, any translation, it's impossible that it's perfect. There are some imperfections, of course. But I have to tell you that many Israelis prefer to read the Bible in English, especially if it's a new version, which is kind of easy. But even the King's...
because it's more accessible.
Absolutely. Even King James, than in Hebrew, because Hebrew is not Israeli. So the main advantage is that you have the entire thing in Israeli, which is not exactly Israeli. It's written Israeli. And here I need to say that there is a difference between the written language and the spoken language. And of course, the spoken language is not a habitus. It's not a convention, a social convention. The spoken language is acquired automatically as a child. We always said in Israel, in England, even a 12-year child speaks English perfectly, even if he's a dapar, like an idiot. So dapar is from the
military slang,
right?
Yeah.
So the point is that a spoken language is acquired automatically, and you do not need to study it. So a mother should not tell her child, don't say, no, this is his mother tongue, this is her mother tongue. Now, a written language is a habitus. In fact, most languages in the world that are alive today are not written down. So most languages do not have a script traditionally. Of course, linguists write them down. So literature is a habitus, and you can decide, for example, if you are, a poetry critic, you can decide whether to write this way or that way. And I have to say that Tanakh Ram is written in a very dignified language. It's not...
so it's not cheapening the scriptures.
Absolutely not.
So why aren't the Education Ministry adopting it with open arms?
Well,
is it for political reasons, just like Gitit said?
Well, look, it's not only that they are not adopting it. I can quote Shimshon Shoshani, who used to be the Mankal, the
Director General.
The Director General of the Education Ministry. Of course, he didn't say it seriously, but he said that we should hang all the principles of the schools that allow Tanakh in the Kikar Ha'ir, in the square. In the city square. Of course, he did not. I hope he did not mean it really, but literally. But of course, it's kind of shocking how principals and the Education Ministry regarded Tanakh. I think it has to do with politics. It has to do with a myth. Some people, as Gitit said, the further you are from the ground, the more mythical you are, and the more kind of full of palpable poppycock your mind is. It's like menutakim.
I want to add one more thing. You referred earlier to the centrality of religion and Bible in the Israeli culture and in Israel in general. And I'm not against it, but I think I'm not against religion, I'm not against ideals. I think if you live in Israel and you're an Israeli, your life is not easy, and you have to have some ideas in order really to live your daily life here. But you have to know what you are based on. And I want to give an example. Ghil'ad referred earlier to the merismus in the Bible. And actually, in a very acute and very daily political debate in Israel. Everyone debate about the borders of Israel, the borders of Israel today. This is the most important question on the political agenda. And many people refer to the Bible, but what they don't know is when the Bible refers to the border of Israel, they use merismus. They don't use really from this mountain to that mountain, because when you take the biblical text and you try to draw a map according to the verses, to the different objects they refer to, different mountains or different rivers or the sea, you don't get anywhere. And you have to know this is a kind of legendary idea of the Bible itself, that the land of Israel is not really limited. But when you base your political agenda over a myth and you're not aware at all it is a myth, then it is a problem.
Well, religion is instrumentalized. That's probably not the first and certainly not the last time this will happen in history, but I'm afraid we'll have to end it here. Professor Ghil'ad Zuckermann, a linguist at the University of Adelaide, and Dr. Gitit Holzmann, a lecturer in Jewish philosophy at the Levinsky Teachers College in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for coming in today and talking to us about your really fascinating research.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
חייב להיות בתנועה והוא לא עוצר, איזה שפע של יופי, הנוף משקר, הוא קופץ רק לאגו טריפ והוא תכף חוזר, אז למה את בוכה? למה